Good evening and welcome to the New York Society Library. My name is Sarah Holliday and I'm the library's head of events, and we are delighted to have you with us. For those of you new to the library, we are the oldest library in the city and one of the oldest in the country, founded in 1754. We acknowledge that the library stands on the traditional land of the Lenape people, to whom we pay respect. From the beginning, we've been a library for both readers and writers, so we're pleased to be able to offer a vibrant season of events with authors. Major events are generally open to the public, so please take a look at our website or speak to a staff member to learn more about what's coming up. This evening, we are honored to be presenting this conversation with Rachel Eliza Griffiths and Jacqueline Woodson in cooperation with the Harlem Arts Salon. This event is part of the library's Black Literature Matters programming and is generously supported by the Oak Foundation. Our great thanks to Margaret Porter Troop, who has brought us this wonderful event tonight, and I will now hand the stage over to her. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Margaret Porter Troop, and I am so pleased and honored to be here with you tonight. I would like to thank the New York Society Library and Sarah Holliday and Carolyn Waters for inviting me to host this Harlem Arts Salon here tonight. And I would like to thank Rachel Eliza Griffiths and Jacqueline Woodson for agreeing to be our first guest. The Harlem Arts Salon is something that I created in 2004, about after Quincy Troop, my husband and I, came back to New York from California, where he was teaching at UCST, and he retired from there, and I was running an art gallery. And during the time that I ran a contemporary art gallery in California, I also started a program for children, because one day I walked into my gallery space and I could hardly believe that this little girl from Gloucester, Mississippi had created a contemporary art gallery that was being reviewed in all the major art magazines. And I was like, that's me! So I started this because I thought there are other kids like me in places like Gloucester who don't have access to the arts, and they can do what I did because I dreamed it, and I was able to do it thanks to my husband, Quincy Troop, who sort of laid the roadmap for cultural programming for me. He taught me everything I know about how to do it and all of that, and showed the example. And so he's been a great mentor, a wonderful husband and friend, and thank you, sweetheart. So, the Harlem Arts Salon has had some really, really terrific events. When I started doing it in our apartment in Harlem, in the Graham Court apartment buildings, we would invite people like Toni Morrison. Hugh Masekela was the first guest that I had. And I decided also to offer a home-cooked meal. So every time I had a salon on Sunday afternoon, when people left church, guess where they went? It was the best deal in town. Not only that, we had a lot of fun, made a lot of great friendships, and have a lot of great memories. And so eventually, I decided that my next move would be to bring an arts program to Gloucester, Mississippi. So the Gloucester Arts Project is now 10 years old, and we've been taking professional artists to rural Southwest Mississippi to give children ages 6 to 17 a free arts camp, multidisciplinary, to introduce them to the arts, to the basics, and to give them a platform for them to express themselves and discover their own talents and creativity in a way that they don't get a chance to do otherwise. So it's been a wonderful program, and Rachel was one of the first teaching artists. All the workshops are taught by professional artists. Quincy was one of the original artists. Rachel Eliza Griffiths, Danny Glover came down, Terry McMillan, Cassandra Wilson. We introduced kids to distinguished authors as well, as give them an opportunity to express themselves and to discover their own creativity. So this event is just a way also to publicize that program, because I'm the chief cook, money raiser, you know, and we need help. So if you can, please make a donation. So I won't take up any more of your time. I'm sure tonight will be a wonderful event. Looking forward to more. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I'm just going to add a word about tonight's keynote speakers. We are honored to have with us Rachel Eliza Griffiths and Jacqueline Woodson. Ms. Griffiths is an artist, poet, and now novelist. Her collection, Seeing the Body, was selected as the winner of the 2021 Hurston Wright Foundation Legacy Award in Poetry, the winner of the 2021 Patterson Poetry Prize, and a finalist for the 2021 NAACP Image Award. Her visual and literary work has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The New York Review of Books, The Paris Review, Best American Poetry for 2 years, The Georgia Review, Guernica, Tin House, The Los Angeles Review of Books, and many others. Her collections of poetry include Miracle Arrhythmia, The Requited Distance, Mule and Pear, and Lighting the Shadow. Tonight's book, Promise, is her debut novel, and we encourage you to purchase your copy from our independent friends, the Corner Bookstore, just outside this room at the table there. Jacqueline Woodson is the author of more than 30 books for young people and adults, including Brown Girl Dreaming, Another Brooklyn, Before the Ever After, Feathers, and Red at the Bone. She received a 2023 Guggenheim Foundation Fellowship, a 2023 E.B. White Award, a 2020 MacArthur Fellowship, the 2020 Hans Christian Andersen Award, the 2018 Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award, and the 2018 Children's Literature Legacy Award, and was the 2018-2019 National Ambassador for Young People's Literature. Her work has also garnered a National Book Award, multiple Coretta Scott King Awards, Newbery Honors, and NAACP Image Awards. Please join me in welcoming Jacqueline Woodson and Rachel Eliza Griffiths.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Margaret. It's so nice to be here with Rachel. Oh, my goodness.
It's so nice to be here.
I just wanted to start by asking how many people have not, and you won't get in trouble, have not yet read Promise? I'm just thinking about my questioning without too many spoilers. Okay, great. So now we know our audience.
Yeah. It's on. This is on, right? Yeah.
It
Okay.
seems quiet, though,
It
right?
does. It's the library.
Oh.
But I also, before we get started, I just also want to say how much the Gloucester Art Project has impacted me and means so much to me in my day-to-day kind of going around in the world. And I just, being involved with the project in 2014 and the children and how amazing they are and what they receive and what we get back. And also, I just want to say again, I know the love that happens and joy that happens in Promise would not be there without the love and friendship and sisterhood and kindness of you, Margaret. So if we could just... Okay.
That's so awesome. So you were going to start with a short reading?
Yes, yes.
Yay.
I'm going to start with a very brief reading. I'm actually going to read from the novel's close, but it won't give anything away. And this closing part is in the voice of Cynthia, who is my guiding star in the story. And it's her story. She's 13 years old, and she is defiant, bold, and dreamy, and intelligent, and trying to figure out the world around her. At this point in the story, she's survived a tremendous amount of things happening to her and her sister and the world she knew. And so the passage that I'm going to share with you is a moment where Cynthia's mother is being carried out of her mother's house, her grandmother's house, after passing away from an illness. And so I'm going to just share that part with you and then look forward to us being in conversation, Jackie. I'm I'm so happy. I'm in the library, which is a place that like raised me, and I'm sitting here with one of my most favorite people and writers. So, and you all, readers and writers, dear friends, are here tonight. And a shout out to my baby sister, love of my life, and she's back in the corner, and I've embarrassed her. But Melissa, Melissa too is one of the reasons why this book exists at all. When I looked at the door again, they were coming out, speaking quietly now and then to each other. Easy now, yeah? Slow down, son. Yeah, Papa, I got her. Move it on the side a bit, son. My arms is sore today. Yes, sir. Easy like I showed you, yeah? This gal light as a feather, poor thing. Pull it up that way. Don't drop none of them flowers, son. Not a one. Lift your shoulder. Lift your shoulders like me. See that boy? Yes, sir. But I can't see too much in the dark. The dark don't got nothing to do with this, son. Told you before that this is all about respecting a life. They carried Mama down the steps solemnly, slowing so that we could look at her. Jesus, said Ginny, clenching my arm. And that early starshine, I stared down at Mama's veiled shadow. Lifting my eyes to Will's face, I was startled by the tears streaming down his strong brown cheeks. Church open? Said Mr. Randall. Lyrae, Tina Lee, whispered my grandmother. They all over there. Then my breath drew itself inside me like a speck of dark glass. Without speaking, I wrapped my arms around my grandmother. All right then, Ginny, he said, nodding. A real pretty gal going home. A fine woman, truly. Remember, they don't never leave us. God's got her. My mother's silent head trembled a little between his arms. Out of my home and into the Lord's house my daughter goes to that great table, said Ginny. We can't leave the dead alone, and they can't leave us. They can't leave us. Amen, said Mr. Randall. Then he said something to Will, who pivoted automatically in the direction that he needed to, so that it wouldn't be awkward to lift Mama's body into the clean bed of the truck. Pulling down a metal ledge, they loaded Mama into the back. Will lifted the ledge and locked it. The sound was so normal I was horrified. They'd loaded my mother's body inside there like she was furniture. It made me remember how Mr. Caesar had driven up to our old home in Salt Point with my daddy's burned body in the back. They'd driven Daddy away in a truck, too. The noise of the car door in Salt Point and the click of the truck's safety lock here in Damascus collided violently in me. I ran to the back of the truck and began to pound on it with my fist. The fabric fell away from my head. Under a growing canopy of fireflies, I tore up handfuls of grass, clawed dirt. Shuffling painfully towards me, my grandmother tried to throw her heavy arms around me. Sweat beaded my throat, twisting around my neck as I thrashed. I threw my cries into the dust. The tail light of the trucks flickered red, and, worried that I'd knock my grandmother down, I sank down in the dust. Across the gravel of my grandmother's yard, Mama's flesh was being carried out of our lives. And the dust of my people, the steel of my life strikes the flint of my memory. Here is the glowing shirt my father once wore over his bones, and the education that fit around his ribs like armor. I remember his patience and how he taught me to take my time with every test, every story. I am my father's patience. Here is Mama escaping through the windows, her suffering dissolving in the low yellow moonlight of the world, while far away stars blaze like oceans. I am the light in the bones beneath the sea, rising to meet the sky. I remember what those bones believed, the songs inside shells, the children who became coral, pearls, and anchors. Do you see how hard, do you see how hard the land glittered around the foundation of the house my mother and my father built for me? Do you remember the blood? I am Theodore, Alma, Calliope. Do you see how my great-grandparents kissed those school children they could not save from their dream? Do you remember our blood? There is a memory so old, it has known better than to trust us with its full face. Thank you.
Ooh. Thank you. You know, it's so often in the book, it's that moment of reading something and then just wanting to sit quietly with whatever gift you have just given us. And I think that, I know I read slowly anyway, but your writing is so beautiful, and also you have so many stories going on here, so many tales to tell, and you weave them into each other in this beautifully dynamic and intricate way. When I heard Calliope, I'm like, oh yes, Calliope, we're going back to 1902. And so I think I want to just start, first I want to bow down to your multi-hyphenness. Just that you're a poet, you're a fashionista, you're an artist, and you're a novelist. And what brought, and now you're writing about Black folks in Maine at the edge of the civil rights movement and survival. And I think my first question for you is, how did we get to Maine? How did you as a writer choose Maine?
Thank you for that. You know, I felt with the story, I spent a lot of time thinking about geography and setting, and what would be a kind of setting that would really amplify the kind of psychological atmosphere that is happening with the characters in their world. I also felt, you know, Maine is a kind of place we hear about, many of us, and we think, oh, up in Maine, and there's all these kinds of, oh, Maine, you know, somewhere far up in Maine. But what is that like? You know, what is Maine? On a personal level, when I was in graduate school at Sarah Lawrence, I ended up kind of heading north and toward Maine several times. And when I'd go, it would be this tremendous beauty and solitude, which spoke to me, and wildness, real raw up there. But also I would think, how would a person like me even grow up here? Where's the community? Where's the Black people? Where's something? And so I thought, you know, there's a tension in this landscape where, you know, there's a peace, but also there's a real kind of sense of feral. It's very feral and it's wild. And, you know, people are kind of living in a way where the weather dictates the living of the winters, and it's kind of extreme. And so that became the kind of environment that I began to picture this story happening in. I also felt that if I were to place the story in the South, it would have been too easy for me. One, although I have a strong relationship with the South, I wouldn't say I'm a Southern writer. I'm a Mid-Atlantic writer, which also places me in this like middle space. Like recently people are like, you're a Mid-Atlantic writer. And I'm like, who said that? Okay. So I felt as though, you know, if I placed it in the South, the reader also would come into the story too familiar and think, oh, I've seen the pictures of lynching. I've seen everyone covered in sweat. I've seen the films and how, you know, and I just thought if I take it far, far north, then it's almost the contrast of what you'll see on that white canvas that's Maine will pop. And so I thought of that. That's probably my visual artist sensibility coming in. Like, it's going to really pop now. And also to put the kind of issues of race and what's happening with these girls in the North versus the South or somewhere else. And the coldness of race, like literally the weather. Most of the novel at some point, it comes from like the lushness of summer into autumn, and then when everything really happens, and I don't think I'm giving anything away here, there's a blizzard. It's a whiteout. And so that is all happening. And so those are some reasons I feel, going far to Maine. And also, you brought up 1902, and, that's a kind of really important moment in the book when the father finally tells his daughters part of their history and their legacy. But it also kind of explains some of his kind of trauma or being locked inside himself of not wanting to confront it. But that, we've always been told, when enslaved people got to the North, they were free, it's better in the North, everything in the North. And I thought, well, not really. Not really at all. But everything nationally was like, what's happening in Selma, what's happening there. But there was a real racial hostility and racial hatred and violence in the North that we don't usually, it's not even peripheral. It's just North is the Mecca, North is getting free. But so many stories and things I read about, they had lynchings and all kinds of things that would happen up there too. And so I wanted to look at that and not just to have that hyper focus in the South.
Yeah, it takes the cliche right out of it.
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
that's what's part of the brilliance of it, is that it's a completely different canvas. I was listening to the 99 Years podcast, which is all about what happened to the Black folks in Maine, because they were there. And so that juxtaposing that with your book and seeing how they lived. So in your novel, there are three girls, and I just want you to talk about them a little bit. Inside this very, very white world are three Black girls who are friends. And their moms are they're the two Black families in Salt Point, in this Salt Point community, who are basically battling racism every single day. And I was thinking about when we make the decision to send our kids to quote unquote independent schools, and how that narrative just circles them, and there's so much stuff that happens that they can't tell their parents. And then you have this moment where teacher dies and a new teacher comes in, Miss Ally. I just love that that's her name, because she's nobody, well, she's white folks ally, but she's torturing these girls, and they stand up to her. And just what was writing that moment? Can you talk about that moment a little? Your choice to have that moment of these young people becoming activists real fast.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I mean, it was thinking so much about kind of how at this age, 13, 15, that these young Black girls are getting educated, and what that means in Maine in 1957. It's that in and of itself is just ripe with tension and dissonance and power, and also vulnerability. And so, being someone myself who it's like books, libraries, school, that's where you're going to get like the knowledge and the truth, and the history and the facts of what the world is, and perhaps who you are. And that these girls are they're very suspicious of what is coming toward them, as far as, well, this is who you are, here is your history, here are your memories. And it's really in conflict with how they're living, to go into this school. There's this kind of very weird, sketchy school that the girls are attending because their father has been hired there. So he's been hired there to teach, and at the same time, he too is kind of under the microscope and under the lens of how and what he is allowed to teach in the school. And what he does, though, is kind of does this anti-education and at home has been building up these girls to be these kind of like battle axes, like very, very strong girls. And so when they take that strength into the school, it's a problem. And so the girls and their two families, between these two families who are very loving and protective of each other, they're trying to forge, where do we go next? Because they're all about to graduate. And then it's kind of like in 1957, if you're a black girl, are you cleaning somebody's kitchen? Are you going to try to get a scholarship to go to some kind of college? Are you going to marry a preacher and, run a church or something like that, or be a secretary, or what's available to you? But what's available to what you dream you want to do. And so the girls are battling with this, and they can see it in their parents' lives, and the women and their fathers, and what's them being kind of eroded and rubbed down in a certain way, and also still being very strong and being insistent that there's a freedom that they can have, but it's at a price. And the girls kind of learn what that price is. I rambled around and kind of forgot your question.
You're a New Yorker. Like, this is how we do
this
it.
This is, but,
it does answer it.
I mean, I really feel that when I was younger and, the late 70s, 80s, this was also something that, it happens now, like, where you are in your identity at that age and what that means. When I was younger, when I was Cynthia's age, around 13, I was attending a Catholic school that just the nuns and the kind of whole environment did not work well with a kind of precocious, hyper intelligent black girl. And so I would see these nuns, the punishment I might get for doing something that Katie does was totally different, or just, you're in here, but you don't exist. You know the answers to the questions, you raised your hands, you're not getting called on, you're not getting acknowledged, you're not, you're a ghost. So what do you do in your education if you're a ghost? Because you're not the student even, you're not the pupil. You're not the site of focus. Whereas someone like Miss Ally comes in, and there's a young white girl, Ruby, in the novel, who kind of identifies with Ruby and kind of captures her in a certain kind of way. And literally, she will kind of capture her. But I don't want to give anything away. But kind of wants to then teach Ruby kind of whiteness in a way that Ruby, because of her class circumstances and being a pariah of the town, had no concept of in a certain way, that she could actually assume whiteness and then be above her friends. And so all of these things are happening with the girls as they're holding on to their intuition, which for me as an artist, my intuition is probably my greatest educator. But they have this intuitive education that they've learned from their mothers and their fathers and themselves. And then also what happens like within your family when the people who love you most and want to save you are also in some ways telling you things that are going to muzzle or gag you, but you need to be safe, So that kind of conflict too of, I grew up, it was like children should be seen and not heard. So just silence. And the question of why would be met with, because I said so, because I said so. And that's what you're getting, but you're also getting, I love you. You can do anything. Get this opportunity. Go to school. If you go to school, if you only go to school, well, like Maine, school is not a place where everything, you're free there. Not for these girls.
Yeah, and the fact that Cynthia skipped, short for higher, skipped 2 grades and was in class with her sister as a result. Yeah, there's so, I think it's, there's so much love in the book, and so much care. I feel like even reading it when it got really hard, I'm like, okay, to a certain extent, I am safe. Like there is this way in which the Black community took care. They were so small in this town and took really great care of each other as best they could. And I want to talk to you a minute about, because I want to get to Ruby, but without giving too much away. But I want to talk to you about your writing process, because you're in the head of a racist white man who's got his own stories to tell. You're in the head of Miss Ally. You're in the head of a teacher, I'm blanking on her name, who took her life.
Miss Burden.
Miss Burden, of course. You're in the head of three girls. You're in the head of lots of people, and you're telling their stories. And what was that like for you emotionally? And what was that like for you in terms of deciding whose stories you were going to tell?
I think it was always Cynthia's story, and it was always her story. And at the same time, I think this constellation of different voices and how she can engage them in the moments when she doesn't, obviously, was important to me. But unlike poetry, for me, working on this book, it literally would be like voices. And this is a new sensation of like, who is that talking? Who's trying to take over? What is going on? I need to call my therapist.
Yeah.
Anyway, these,
All the writers in the room are nodding.
yeah, I can hear the chuckles. And, they're sitting on your shoulders and they're saying, well, what about this? And you didn't ask me this question. And it really kept things active. There were definitely days where I would just kind of hurl myself back from my desk and I have to go take a walk and just, how can I write this? This is really hard. Really having a physical and immediate sense of it, but also as a writer too, like I can't back down and look away. And this is what has been given. And, then how do I also offer this to a reader of when you put the book down and you say, oh my gosh, like this might be too much. But if there's also this kind of love, that is also part of the ribcage of the terror that is happening, then like so many of us, we have love in our lives and how it affects us. In spite of every single moment that we look around, there's something happening to us, to the world, to the country. How do you go on? How do you deal with, the promises your parents or loved ones made to you, and those promises end up broken, or you realize, my dad promised me he would do these things and take care of me, but actually I see that his life or our life won't let him, and then to see your loved persons as a person, or here's your father as a man now, suddenly that clarity, or you see your, mother as a woman in a situation and you have to pull out. And so feeling these characters in their different situations and kind of, where is a moment in their lives that might explain who they are now. So that you're also not saying like, well, why would this teacher, Miss Ally, treat this girl this way? Or why would this happen? Or why would, Cynthia or Ezra, who is the elder sister, where did they get these things from? And so to have the parents' history and the teacher's history, I'm just so fascinated by the different histories that we absorb and repel all the time. So, it was hard. I mean, it took me 7 years to write this book.
Wow.
There were just years where I would go to it, and I would also, as a writer, say, I'm not ready. I don't have the chops yet. Now I do. I really do. But I just thought, take your time. Like you have an opportunity to really hear something. Take your time with it. And so I'm also a slow reader too. And so just the writing was even more kind of slow and wanting it to be really precise and lucid. So I would say that it was, and then when the book was finished, I missed the voices, some of them. not all of them. And I thought, but they have to live without me now, and they have to live in readers, and this is a farewell, and it's a very intimate relationship to have with narratives and storytelling that I've never experienced before, and it's left me, a more expanded kind of person from it.
Wow. It's so true. I always say, if we weren't writing, we would definitely be institutionalized.
Listen, okay.
I was talking to a friend the other night, and I'm working on this book, and she was like, the portal is open. Like, you just have to sit down and write it. And I was like, I wish it would close because I don't want to be in that world.
Oh, the portal is intense. And the
Yeah.
portal, and once you're there and it's like, hi, we got something for you. And you're just hoping that you might, there might be some kindness, but no, I totally agree with you about the portal.
Oh, man.
The portal for poetry is so different.
How is it different?
I mean, when you're on the page, your voice as a poet is different than a world building that happens in a novel, and particularly if you're writing something that happened in 1957, you've got to go back and make some bridges. And then sadly enough too, with this book, bridges of, civil rights movement. Well, we're in a civil war now. It's not that long of a bridge. The things that happen to, the families and what they're dealing with, we can look at our own country right at this moment and see what white supremacy continues to do. Affirmative action, interesting to think of that related to the novel and education and what's happening to these girls. But there's just so many kind of urgent, immediate things that suddenly the feeling of it being a historical novel has kind of like evaporated. I'm like, oh no, this is now, and it's sad, the banning of books. We're sitting in a library, thinking, it's just...
Even with the girls in their classroom, like here were 3 black girls in a classroom in Maine getting no history, getting none of their history. And you look at Florida, you look at Texas, you look at all these places where our history is getting erased. And it's like, this was 1957. No one was trying to teach anything about the history of our folks. So I know that we're going to have time for questions from the audience. I just want to talk a minute about Ruby. So Ruby is a white girl, as you said, from a poor family. There's this great part where Miss Ally is asking her where she lives, and she's like, because she wants to come to her house, and she's like, no, you go up there, you'll get eaten by wolves. Basically, I was like, wow, we are in the wild here. But she's a very complicated white girl who wants to fly. She wants to be a pilot. And reading her, as every time she came, I was like, oh, Ruby, I love you so much. I hate you, Ruby. Oh, Ruby, like you just need you just need some love. Oh, you're a hot mess. You're done. And just going back and forth. So tell me about the journey to writing her, because she's telling her own story.
She was one of the voices where sometimes, as you just mentioned, I'm like, goodness, Ruby is being affected by not the same things that Cynthia and Ezra are, but she's being affected at the age that she is. She's 15. She's trying to figure herself out, but then also her voice would, I'd be like, Ruby, you got to be quiet, girl. This is not about you, And so she, in previous drafts, at one point was like pushing and so insistent that I briefly considered like what would happen to have the narrative between the two of them, between Cynthia and Ruby, but then I didn't want the binary. And I thought that again would be too kind of easy to have, like, here's the white girl and here's the black girl, and then but to rather have the 3 of them together. And so, Ruby has, she's very, very strong-minded and strong-willed. And at the same time, she's so young. She thinks that she can be, a female pilot in 1957, and that, of course, she can be that. Why can't she be that if she just, works hard and does what she's supposed to do, but she's also a schemer. And she's that way because she doesn't have the 1950s traditional Dick and Jane nuclear family structure, which was like the education in those textbooks of, here's Mom and Jane and Spot and the dog. And, I think Morrison brings this up brilliantly in Bluest Eye, that kind of lesson of see Dick run and all of that, and then it runs together. So Ruby is all the way outside of that. And at some point, she starts to understand in a way her class situation more so than understanding whiteness until she meets this teacher who is offering her literally like new glasses to put on and look at herself, of what she can have. But before that moment happens, Ruby is convinced that like there's no difference between herself and Cynthia and Ezra, that they're all kind of getting free together and freedom is everything. And if they're free, they can be themselves. And Ruby is free in a way because she has no parents. And she doesn't really care or absorb any of the education in school. It's like she's able to go to the school for free because of a rich white man who said, had this moment with her mother and insulted her like, oh, the poor white kids can come to the school, so you should bring your daughter. And her mother was like, how dare him, and he didn't pay me a compliment about my appearance. So Ruby's also getting this education as a young white girl too about like beauty, how to be the beautiful white girl, and how that will be kind of the web through which things will fly, and that she will have this kind of hunger fulfilled that she's looking for in her life. And so she goes back and forward like a 15-year-old, where one minute you want to hug her and protect her, and the next minute you're like, get out of the house, you're annoying, like what's wrong with you?
I live with one of those. Male version.
So I wanted her to have that kind of where you don't kind of settle into a role and now you know who Ruby is and she's become predictable and now she can be the white girl. That I just didn't want to do that. I was very sympathetic at moments for Ruby and still am, of like, well, what happens to this girl too? Like, she's suffering too. It's not black and white here. And I want to have it nuanced and complicated about how her mind is like really a quick study of, well, if I have money, then I can have this, or if I'm blonde, I can do this. If I'm this, I can have this, and people will see me. And so, what happens between her and particularly Ezra, because they're the two who are very, very close, is a kind of grief that they both realize we can never be friends. Not in Maine in 1957. There's no space for us to be friends. The friendship could only happen in a transactional thing. Oh, you clean my house, you're my friend, or you do this or that. But the actual law of the land in a certain way does not encourage friendship, and the kind of tolerance or something. So I think that there's some of the things with Ruby. And she also is very intelligent and like seeing her parents more so than Ezra and Cynthia, as seeing them as people. Her father's a drunk. He's a pariah. He has this whole history. Her mother is living in the past as this beauty queen at a local county fair.
With the hogs.
Yeah, with the hogs. She's literally crowned in a sty. And so, she's watching them and sees them more as people because they don't have the role of parents really for her. So then, like, what happens to those kinds of white girls versus the ones that we have been kind of normalized into seeing or expecting? So I wanted to think about that.
Wow. So I'm going to just ask you one more question, and then I'll open it up to audience questions. Tell me what the process is when you're writing fiction. Do you stop writing poetry, or are you writing both at the same time? And then what happens with your art? Like, how does that day look?
Well, it's a day. It's a day of many parts with a lot of coffee. Depending on I usually listen to what is the most dominant project. Like that's the energy that dictates where everyone falls in line, so to speak. So, when I was writing Promise, when I began writing Promise in 2014, which is also when I met Margaret, in the summer of 2014, my mom passed away. And so I had been trying to write a novel prior to that, but that was the clarifying moment for me. It was like, you write this novel or you never write it. And you have plenty to keep you busy. But I couldn't let go of the story. And so I was writing Promise, but then I wrote Seeing the Body during that time because I was grieving my mother, and the space and capacity and vessel of poetry best served somewhere to put that so that I could have the bandwidth to work on a novel. So that happened. And with visual art, it kind of is like, I don't know, it's like hydrogen or something. Like it can attach to any spot of the day. Like it can kind of be anywhere because it's more episodic in a certain way. Like if I'm doing photographs, things stop. It's almost like it changes the tone and affects everything, but it doesn't weigh or hit because I'm not using language. Even though I'm engaging language with my photography, I'm not having to sit at my desk and write words visually and use it. Also, my photography tends to be outdoor, like natural landscape, out in the world. I'm in the South.
It's so beautiful. I
Thank
love looking at
you.
your pictures. And there are a lot on the website, so if you just go to the website and see, but your work is phenomenal.
Thank you so much. Oh, I'm really moved right now. Oh, mind is blown. So that sometimes when the space of language is a bit intense, I will then ease into, and no, I have to leave it, but like ease into a time where I'm working on photography, maybe I'm drawing, I'm painting, and like something is being recharged and reset so that when I come back to the page, I've worked something out in a way. And so I feel that happens. And now when I was younger, it was like, here's the poetry and here's the prose. And I wrote prose for a long time, but I just never showed it to anyone. It meant that much to me where I wasn't like, I need to publish my novel by 20. Like no, I just need to sit. It's a different kind of water I'm treading here, And so as I'm getting older, I don't feel as vigilant about the boxes. I like to dissolve the edges now and kind of seeing the body was this hybrid thing of poetry and photographs. And I'm continuing to go more in that direction with like the project I'm working on now, post Promise. So not being so rigid and just letting it all flow. And then adjusting my days, which are really full. I mean, I will be up in the morning and work till like 1 a.m., just constantly engaging work, or I'm going to music galleries, or it's all feeding it and keeping it going. And I feel fortunate right now in my life. Like I wake up and it's just art. It's writing, it's art, it's friendships. And, I don't know, it's just like a song. It's some good music. It's a good jam. It's a house, like a daily house party, for better or for worse. And so going with it. And some days it doesn't go well. It doesn't go well at all. But get up tomorrow.
Yeah.
Put your shoes on. Get it going,
Oh,
I know you
Ashe,
know.
I know too well. I'm looking forward to tomorrow because today was a bust.
Okay, listen. I'm really with you today about it. Get to tomorrow.
Thank you. So does anyone have questions? And nothing they could ask is wrong, right?
Nothing at all. Everything is right here.
I had a question.
What's your name? If you could just tell us your name.
Bernadette Beekman. Thank you for signing my book, both of you. My books, I should say. I haven't read it because I just got it today. And you said it in Maine, and I know that there were several dozen underground railroad stops in Maine. So did you talk about that in the book, or?
It's not in the book, but I definitely researched that, and I also thought about
after World War II, the black soldiers that were placed in Maine to protect the railroad system that was happening there. And there were these kind of real clusters of black community. But a thing that can happen to me is that I start to find so much history.
You can't put it on.
And then oh, that would be the good. And then I'm like, oh, I'm far away from Cynthia. Like, would she have access to that? Would she know that? And I'm like, no, where she is so folded into the landscape, she wouldn't really have that. Whereas she might have news on the radio or television from like what's happening with the civil rights and things happening and Medgar Evers and everything is just getting started there. So there's that moment for a writer where you're researching so much history and you have to make a call about when is it going to trample or override the elements and things that have to make the story breathe and live. But what I do feel about reading so much about Maine and looking at places like Deer Island and the land and just a lot of photographs and videos and things. I feel like I could lead a tour around Maine at this point. But I feel like it's in the writing because I really immersed myself in like closing my eyes and I'm walking and watching films, just like Maine focused films and just listening to radio, like Maine radio stations. Like how do they talk there? What's the like the dialect or like things that they do, or how things are arranged. So I feel like that authority, I hope, is present and sensed in the writing, even though I didn't jump back. I mean, I go back to like 1902, but it's actually in a made up town called Damascus. In Salt Point, as you'll read, it's an imagined town, but it's a composite of different things that I read about in accounts with real horrible racial incidents that happened in Maine, and then I created this fictional town that would have that tone to it. So
I can't wait to read it.
oh, thank you, Bernadette. Thank you so much for coming.
Did you go to Maine? I mean, presently. I went for a period. I looked at this guy who used to go to Maine every weekend. From Arts Salon, we drive there.
Oh, she knows.
And what I discovered in Maine, of course, they were in the Hidden Mountains and Ogunquit vacation land. But we discovered that there's a very old black community, and they're what was it? These gorgeous black men, and they wear jeans, because they have to. They're mountain men. Mm-hmm. And when I discovered true black mountain men, because I was a Jew, and that's why we were named. It was great. And a lot of them come from a long line of cabinet makers. Mm-hmm. Because we're responsible for all those old wood tables with heat on and all that. Mm-hmm. And they were apprentices of the white guys. And they're still there, actually. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, did you go to Maine when you were writing this book and come across any Black communities?
Unfortunately, when I started to really bear down and write the book, it was COVID. Mm-hmm. So that kind of punchline of like, oh, there's a global pandemic, write a novel. That was actually me sitting there trying to do that.
That's like the name, but
yeah, exactly. But no, when I was younger, I went there a lot, and I think when I was traveling as a poet, sometimes I'd go far north to do events and things like that. But as far as kind of specifically traveling to Maine in relationship to this novel, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, I kind of had to use the resources that were available to me, either in like in books, reading books, looking at pictures, looking at magazines at bookstores that are focused on Maine, and then also just virtually. But no, the space of carpentry and things like that in Maine is like some of their greatest kind of gifts and talents is woodwork and iron welding and things like that, making things with their hands. And so the male character, Mr. Caesar, in the novel, he is that kind of man that I imagine you're describing. That he literally makes these special benches that he learned in his family that are inscribed with names of the family members, and they're ornately carved, and he works with his hands. He's a kind of man of the earth. So I think the energy of that is directly in my character, Mr. Caesar. And he's very, very defiant. And, when the police are trying to threaten him, he lifts his gun up too and lets them know he's ready. So thank you for that. Hi.
Hi, my name's Luann.
Hi, Lynn.
I was just curious, and this is actually for both of you, when you're writing about with young people, protagonists, teenagers, young people, at what point do you ever think you're writing YA or that you need to go adult? And what is something?
So Luann's question was, when you're writing with young people as protagonists, at what point do you ever think you're writing YA? I love that my young adult people are here. The rule I learned was that it's adults. Well, y'all know this. When your young person is looking back on a time, so they're looking at it from like Red at the Bone is adult because she's looking back on that period. Another Brooklyn, she's in her 30s looking back on the period when she was 15. But if they were 15 in that moment, then it would be considered young adult. And so when I'm writing, I know that it's an adult. I know when the adults are in my head that it's going to be a book that adults, that's targeted, that's written to adults, that of course young adults will read because they do.
They definitely do. I think for me with Promise, some of the content is just not, it would kind of really knock it out of the water for YA, although I do feel that like a certain kind of 12 or 13 or 14-year-old would probably clearly be able to read my novel. I think it would be hard. I think they would probably need to have resources, or maybe they're reading it with their parents or within like some kind of guidance. But my novel isn't YA, but it was interesting kind of in the state talking with like my publisher and editor where they're like, oh, it's on the line. And I'm like, oh, there's some things in here. I don't know if it's going to be on the line. But I think that
you'd be surprised. So what kind of like having read the novel, what do you think would be? I mean, the lynching stuff, the stuff that but that's in YA.
That's in YA.
Yeah,
I read a lot of YA, which is
I think all of that stuff with the young people. I mean, we're talking, high schoolers and stuff.
Yeah,
but
I think high schoolers could totally read it. We did like a reading guide and put together questions and things for the book, and I was like, I feel like they're safe and they can read this and have conversations and things like that. And certainly by like college students, I already know and have been told are reading the novel and things like that. So, thank you for that question.
Sure.
Other questions in the back?
Most of us probably read novels and poetry in silence.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering how each of you in composing a poem or a novel, do you read it out loud to yourself and pick up big chunks missing or words that don't sound quite right? Because it's a rare thing nowadays to read it out loud to yourself.
Mm-hmm. I always read out loud. At least once a day I'm reading aloud. Like my ear is one of my strongest editors. Point blank. Like I know and the repetition is over and over to help kind of chisel the sentences and the language and things. I mean, poetry is such it would be a travesty for it not to be read aloud, and that's part of its intention is it's being oral. But whether it's prose or poetry, I always, always, always read aloud over and over and over again. Sometimes I'll even record myself reading it and play it back. And I'm like, ooh, girl, this is a mess here. You know, like it's not to hear my own voice. I'm like, I'm really listening carefully. Because I would be called, a lyric poet, a lyric photographer even. And I think, my prose certainly has some lyricism to it, but the ear is just so magnificent and incredible that I trust it more than what my brain might tell me. Oh, look how clever this sentence is. And I read it aloud and I think maybe not. So what about you, Jackie?
Same. Every single word I write, I read out loud. And I'm all, when I used to teach, I get so impatient because people didn't want to read their stuff aloud. And it's like, you can't hear or see it if you don't hear it.
It's so true.
Yeah, and so I hear the repetition, I hear where I'm trying too hard, I hear when the book is falling apart. So everything I read, I close all the windows and I read it out loud.
I close the windows too.
Thanks for that question. What's your name?
Okay.
Say it again.
Jen. Thank you,
I have
Jen.
a question. I was just wondering, you being a multi-hyphenated artist, poet, writer, and all of that, what does your environment look like? Are you very organized kind of person, or is it colorful, or is it
Vicky.
listening to music?
It could be more organized, is what I could begin to say. Like my mind sees it organized. It's also not a mess either because then I'm overwhelmed and I can't work. But I like to see evidence that I've made this like kind of space that is an extension of what my mind is doing or what I'm thinking about. My photography studio, when I'm working, it's pandemonium in there. If you come in, there's wigs, there's masks, there's like an 18th century dress over there, and then there's like a ratchet zebra print bodysuit. Like it's just all over, and there's a lot of color. There's a lot of wild things happening. And so that part of me loves all of that. And then to do it, and I have the lighting, and it's just, or I'm outside, and it's all of that. But with writing, I might sit somewhere differently if I'm writing prose and poetry at the same time, like in my home. Like where I'm writing poetry is not where I'm also going to be working on like fiction. I just need visually, like, this is the place where you sit for that. I also, like, if I'm traveling, I love hotel rooms, just sit there and write and work and get so much done. You get in that bed with the sheets and it's you're writing. So I would love to have a house someday where I have a hotel room. And then I just go in there and I'm like, you know what to do, It would be so great.
Can you write on like planes and trains and stuff?
I can read on planes. Well, sometimes. I love I think the train is good for writing. The plane, I once there's like one or two bumps, I'm like, I can't. What's going on here? I get distracted by the atmosphere. Yeah, put it away, pray. But no, that's it's something I think about a lot is like environment and space and what do you need? I used to have a lot of like postcards of different writers that are part of like my ancestors or my village. But something happened. I don't know what happened exactly, but suddenly I thought, I don't want to see anyone. I don't want anyone sitting here looking at me. And so I took those down, and I like to have like, maybe I have some leaves or branches, or I like to be able to smell. Like maybe I have a flower or something around, or a plant. So I have a dog. He's good company too.
Okay.
So thank you, Vicky.
You're welcome.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. Yes, Jan.
Hi.
Did you feel, you were writing young women, did you feel at times that you were talking to your younger self and talk about that conversation that you're having with yourself?
Thank you, Jen. Absolutely. I think
Well, I was thinking about your mother, the part you read, I had some book in, I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
you were reading the part about sanctifying your mother's father. And it sounds like you started the novel around the time when you were also more than you were. So
Oh,
that's
yes.
why I was thinking about
Yeah,
that.
I mean, the book, I've been saying it's this kind of love letter to Black girlhood and womanhood, which is kind of, I would say, one of the spinal cords for all the work that I make across mediums is that, which means looking at oneself in different memories and incarnations and things. And so one of the things that happens with Promise is that I get to go back and save my young 13-year-old self in a way and assure her that her kind of nerdiness and intelligence and awkwardness and imagination were right, even though elsewhere I was told, no, be a lawyer, be a doctor, do anything but this, and so getting to kind of go back and engage those feelings again, and find that they're like really there and immediate and very authentic. But I definitely was writing toward a younger version or a part of myself, and also imbuing that younger self with strength in these characters, that I didn't have. I didn't have a certain kind of protection. And I think for a lot of young Black girls, there isn't that kind of protection. Young Black girls going missing, they're lost, they're this, or it's time for them to work. Their childhood is a month and then it's time to be a woman, and people projecting on them that they're fast and grown. And, I wanted to go back and offer another narrative to my younger self and young Black girls. And that extends to those Black girls who do become mothers. Do they do the rote thing because that's what was given to them, or do they defy that and become a different kind of outlaw where they're encouraging and protective of what their girl wants to do because they see that girl. They don't just see a shadow or a silhouette or the replica of themselves. Well, I did this, it was good enough for me, I went through all of this. Well, why would you then want that for your child? Even in a role as like auntie or teacher, like, no, I don't want that for you. And actually, I can't have that for you. I will not let that happen to you. So I felt like I was able, as an adult, to go back to the girls who are my characters and say, I'm not going to let this happen to you. I can do it here on the page.
Oh, wow. Now all the questions are coming. Dr. Green, and then in the back, sorry, maybe more than two.
First of all, I love the way you read, and it felt like I was listening to poetry. It reminded me of why you have to read slowly. But just carrying on that theme of the conversation that you were having with yourself. And I think about writers also have conversations, or enter into conversations with other writers.
Yes.
So who are you in conversation with?
Oh, wow. Thank you, Dr. Green. I mean, there are a host of villages. There's not even just one for me. But I wouldn't. I know. There's a contemporary village of writers that I think about and think with gratitude that I'm alive. This amazing person being one of them, and I'm sitting here like Quincy Troop, Marlon and Nick and Judith. Like, there's just so many people that I admire who are alive, which I think we're so often look at, well, who's dead? That I like the living energy and being excited about what is being made in tandem and what that will look like in 20 years to someone else who's trying to like write about it or narrate it. And that's interesting to me. But, I think the voices of Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, June Jordan, Audre Lorde, Muriel Rukeyser, Carson McCullers, Carmack McCarthy. There's just different kinds of voices that when I think about Cormac McCarthy, who recently passed away, the kind of hardness of things that happen in his books, how does he pull that off without abandoning the reader? And he didn't always pull it off, but he pulled it off really well most of the time, in my opinion. But then to also think about, someone like Lucille Clifton, who I was fortunate enough to have as a teacher, and to have stories that are my direct muscle memory of her seeing me and calling me literally a seer. And she's like, "You're a seer, so you have to choose whether you want to be blind." So when she says that to you, no, I don't want to be blind, I want to see, because Lucille Clifton told me I have to. It's just Sonia Sanchez, living elder, just amazing. A few months ago, I went to hear Sister Sonia read, and there was a moment where she started weeping. She started to cry. And I was crying too, but I just thought, if Sister Sonia in her mid-80s can weep in front of us and be vulnerable, there's some kind of hope here. Like, she lets you have so much and tells you who she is. It's so direct. There's no filter with her. There's no BS. And she'll tell you too when you're, there's an access, the portal, and she is like directly aligned with that energy. And so I've always carried that and have been fortunate again to have a friendship with her. So it's, and I obviously Zora Neale Hurston for many reasons, but there's so many others too, where, I would be remiss not to mention James Baldwin, who feels like a literary godfather or uncle, or, amazing cousin. There's so many writers. And I would also add too, like, musicians for me. There's certain kind of jazz musicians, and I'm reading a draft now of a book about Billie Holiday that'll come out soon. And it just places me back into this environment with Lester Young and all these musicians at the time, and what they were doing is no different what writers are, but the energy and that immediacy too with the musicians and thinking of that. And so someone asked earlier, sometimes I listened to music while I worked on Promise, but because it took 7 years, I no longer have the memory of, like, it would be hard for me to have Nina Simone on and then also be working on Promise. Whereas I would listen to Nina Simone sometimes, maybe if I were writing poetry, because there's like a space. But the figure of certain singers and their lives too really also would be part of my village, as would visual artists. The things that visual artists, certain things that they do, Faith Ringgold, oh my gosh, she's in Promise, Betty Saar, these are my women. So I would feel, that I'm in conversation with such artists in a very humble way, emerging way. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final question in the back.
Hi,
Hi.
my name's Naila. I'm a teacher at Leach High School English.
Yay. Thank you.
I've actually taught another Brooklyn for 4 years. But I wanted to know from both of you, at any point in your writer's process, did you consider that your books would be part of curriculum? I would say that for my school's credit, we're doing a lot to expand and disrupt what's considered canonical. So, bringing in your text and the consideration that you put into guided reading questions for Promise. I just want to know if there was any point where you're like, I know this is going to be on somebody's reading list at some year.
Do you want to just start with about curriculum and different?
Well, you did a teacher's guide for Promise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you a teacher?
Sorry?
What school are you at?
I'm just charter school, it's called Unity.
Oh, okay. Because I remember, I don't know if there's a teaching guide for Another Brooklyn, even though it's on a lot of high school reading lists.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a really good point. It's funny because when I'm writing, you never know where the book's gonna show up, or if it's gonna show up anywhere, especially with my adult books. I know with my young people's literature, thanks to my phenomenal librarians, it ends up in in a lot of libraries and teachers use in the schools, but for adult literature, it's different. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely feel like when I was working on the book, the thing of like where will this go anywhere? There's just so many questions about just getting to the end of the draft or getting to the end of the draft that the editor says this is ready. But I think for me, particularly with Promise, because so much about the novel is about school and libraries and education, it felt more like a hope that there will be something I've accomplished here that would be meaningful and significant enough for teachers to feel that they could show a relationship between the text and their students, is what I would say. But I certainly wouldn't have assumed like, oh, this will be in classrooms or things, because you just don't know. There's certainly books I've come across or read, and I would say I would come through the book hoping like, I hope that there's a teacher who has fallen in love with this book and will teach it, to students because it would be important to them. So that's what I would say for now about it. Thank you so much for your question and for teaching. I'm just, they're so important, high school English teachers, speaking as someone who, who's deeply affected by my own. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you.